While recently working on a video that asked the question, where is Elden Ring? I got thinking all about the origin of the Souls series. And with the remake of Demon's Souls on the PlayStation 5 seemingly looking like a must-buy, I started to wonder, why had it taken this long to get a Demon's Souls remake? The fans have been calling for it for a while, and then I started to wonder, why did we never get a Demon's Souls 2? Was Dark Souls in fact the sequel? The more I dug into the history and the origin of this game, the more fantastic and interesting the story got. Hello everybody, I'm Roy McCoy and welcome to my latest episode of What Happened To. And normally in these videos I take a game and or series that has seemingly disappeared and ask those all important questions. What was it? What happened to it? And could we ever see it again? However, this video is a little bit different because this time we know that we are seeing Demon's Souls, with the remake just around the corner. But much like the history of one of my other favourite RPGs, Kingdom of Amalur Reckoning, the origin story of Demon's Souls. Before I get started, don't forget to smash that like button as it really helps the video to grow. And if you do like these kind of historical analysis of series and games, please consider subscribing. But after that shameless plug, let's dive into the history of Demon's Souls. Our story begins with an interesting gentleman called Hidetaka Miyazaki. And at the start of this story, Miyazaki was working as an account manager for US-based Oracle Corporation. After receiving a recommendation from a friend, he began playing the game Eco, and the experience he had in that game spurred him on to consider a career change to become a game designer. However, he found that opportunities were pretty limited, and one of the few companies willing to take him on was From Software. And it was this decision to join From Software that was to change the fortunes of both the company and Mr. Miyazaki forever. Before Miyazaki joined, From Software had mainly developed games such as King's Field, which was a pretty difficult RPG set in the first person, and Armored Core, a third-person mecha game. And while these video games were pretty good, none of them had particularly changed the fortune or set the world on fire as far as From Software were concerned. Hidetaka Miyazaki worked on Armored Core Last Raven as a planner, and the game was released in 2005. Miyazaki must have done something right, as he was promoted to director for Armored Core 4, which was released in 2006, and again worked as director on Armored Core For Answer, released in 2008. To say that this guy is ambitious and obviously a hell of a talented human being is an understatement, because now that person has gone from account manager at Oracle to planner to director to the president of From Software. However, back at this point, he was still the director on those mecha games. And I gotta say at this point, I have a huge amount of respect for Mr. Miyazaki. The guy's not only hugely ambitious and makes amazing games, but he took the decision at a stage in his life to completely change his career to follow his passion, which is something incredibly admirable. And also, on a personal note, I feel that I could have a very, very cool conversation with him, as he's often cited things such as the Fighting Fantasy book series, produced by Steve Jackson, which I also loved as a child, and H.P. Lovecraft as huge influences. In terms of games, he loves things like King's Field, The Legend of Zelda, and Dragon Quest. Enough of my personal hero worship and admiration for this guy. Let's roll back the clock to while he was working on Armored Core For Answer. It was at some point during this time period that Miyazaki became aware of a project called Demon's Souls. Now, usually we talk about a game that starts off well and ends up at some point in development hell. But at the point Hidetaka Miyazaki became aware of it, the game was already steeped and deep in development hell. Now, apparently, Sony had approached From Software to make a new and interesting RPG, and apparently certain sources say that this was due to a desire to compete with the Elder Scrolls. The original game was designed to be an open world and first-person perspective game. The game was co-produced by From Software's Masanori Takeuchi and Sony's Takeshi Kaji, and it was Sony's Takeshi Kaji. However, the project had little coherent vision. From everything that I've read about Miyazaki and Kaji, it appears that both of them wanted to take a game back to its basics, to revive an older school of game. The project was already considered to be a failure. that led Miyazaki to believe that if he could take control of the project, he could do whatever he wanted with it, and it didn't even matter if he produced an absolute failure, as the project was already considered to be a flop. So, Miyazaki at the helm took the decision to change the project from a first-person game into a third-person action game. And while the origins of the project, spiritual successor to Kingsfield, he wanted to take the game in his own direction and has often distanced the project, or Demon's Souls, from Kingsfield. Miyazaki decided to make a difficult game with plenty of lore. However, he realized that along the way, some of the decisions he was taking would have to remain unmentioned to Sony for fear of them deciding to change the course of the project. These included the difficulty and the Souls system. However, as I said, he talked it over with his co-producer Kaji, who agreed that they should keep it quiet until the game's release. Now, it needs to be said at this point, Demon's Souls, and indeed Dark Souls, has a reputation for being an incredibly grueling and difficult game. However, Miyazaki only intended for the game to be rewarding and challenging, and never intended the game to be too difficult. In fact, one of the original proposed ideas for the game was permadeath, but this was removed as the development team felt the difficulty level was going too far. Kaji has since said that due to fortunate timing and release schedules, the Demon's Souls team were afforded a huge amount of creative freedom, which is probably why the game, that was already considered a failure, went from being a first-person game to a third-person game and incorporated lots of systems never seen in games before. And it's interesting to note at this point that if it hadn't been for that fortunate timing, or indeed the project already been considered a flop, the Souls genre might never have been born. Roll forward to the end of development, and apparently the game only came together towards the end of its development cycle. And despite all of the setbacks that probably should have seen this game cancelled, the game came to the Tokyo Game Show. And it is at this point that once again, the game failed to impress, with Kaji describing the reaction to the demo as nothing short of a disaster. And apparently, most people complained the incredible difficulty that the game presented. In fact, many of the players just assumed that the combat of the game was still in development, because it seemed so difficult for the players to get a grasp on. And there is a wonderful quote from Sony president Shuhei Yoshida, who, upon playing it, spent 2 hours and failed to get beyond the starting area, and described the game as an unbelievably bad game. So the game, considered throughout its development period as a flop, and changed several times with complete creative freedom, had arrived at this point at the Tokyo Game Show as a complete failure. And it was at this point that Sony decided not to localize the game for Western release. A decision that both Sony and Yoshida have both stated that they regret. So, how did Demon's Souls become a thing? And Hidetaka Miyazaki becoming president of From Software? Well, it all goes down to the power of social media. Several Western YouTubers got hold of a copy of Demon's Souls, and upon playing the game, found it to be a challenging yet rewarding experience, something that was the original vision of both Kaji and Miyazaki. And from there, From Software had offers of publishers outside of Japan, namely Atlus USA in North America and Namco Bandai Games in Europe. And from there the game went on to sell in huge amounts. And Hidetaka Miyazaki, a man I refer to as possibly one of the luckiest yet most ingenious people on the planet, ended up not only producing one of the greatest games ever made, but also creating an entire genre and series. So, that's how Demon's Souls was born. But why are we only getting a remake now? Well, it's quite simple. Demon's Souls, the rights to that game, are owned by Sony, which is why From Software went on to develop the spiritual successor to the game, Dark Souls. However, those games were not one console specific like Demon's Souls. No, Dark Souls appeared on Xbox, PlayStation, and later other formats. And the success that Miyazaki found with the Dark Souls games led to him eventually becoming president of From Software and one of the creative icons of the gaming industry. So, without Demon's Souls, and without those strokes of luck that went throughout the project, it's quite possible we never would have seen Dark Souls, Sekiro, Bloodborne, or even Elden Ring. And the decision not to publish Demon's Souls outside of Japan probably cost Sony the exclusivity on the future games that From Software made in the same genre. And this also couples with the fact why we haven't seen a remake or sequel until now. And as I said, it's because Sony still owns the rights. And this is also why the Demon's Souls remake is not being developed by From Software, but instead being developed by Bluepoint Games. However, Miyazaki did give the development and the team his blessing. And this is also the reason we haven't seen a Bloodborne sequel. It's because Sony also owns the rights to Bloodborne. So this phenomenally interesting history has led to not only a series, but a genre of games that has such amazing gameplay that it is a reference point for so many other games with brutal difficulty. So at this point in the video, I usually ask the question, could we ever see another Demon's Souls? And yes we can. We're getting a remake right around the corner. And what's to stop Sony from going on to make Demon's Souls 2 or Demon's Souls 3? If this remake proves a huge success, which I believe it probably will, then what's to stop them? However, that brings me to the end of this fantastic and interesting history of not only a series, but an incredibly interesting man. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below if there are any other games that you would like me to cover in the near future. But for me today, this is Roy McCoy, out!